Tak jak je nahraju takhle. Já to budu teda sdílet na druhou obrazovku. Tak, a když to dám takhle, tak to budou vidět lidi tam a sdílí se teda ta, co je tam. Plus je takhle minimalizuju a...
Já si myslím, že tam mám poznámky spíš jako neprakticky hozený, ale nebude prostě nikdo vidět poznámky.
Můžeš si to natočit víc takhle na sebe, aby to vidělo.
Myslím spíš jako to publikum online, aby... Já je totiž nepotřebuji. Tam jsou nějaký prostě zapomenutý poznámky.
Jo, tak aby ti lidi tady do toho koukali, tak si to natočit tím dál tím víc. Takhle. A
tohle asi pomůže, no.
Ještě potřebuji teda...
Jako mě to rozhodně pomůže, abych nemusel vlastně jako koukat za sebe poznámky, nepotřebuji, ale slavně se.
Teďko, jestli, aby... Jo. Tak a mělo by to fungovat a ukazovat, že jo, takhle všichni do boku a...
Ty potom asi zatáhneš, že jo?
Zatáhnou, tak zatáhnou.
Asi je to lepší, ono je to takový, myslím si, že ta žárovka je taková slabší.
Delayed. Maybe there's an excuse. Like no response to the government, so I'll stop. No response. I know I can do my thing after like that. Who does? Apparently, I don't find other people. It's small. What do you say? Now I.
Od loňského semináře zoologického?
Ne, spíš to bude jako, když to uslyšíte, streamlinovaný, posekaný a angličtí.
Tak, samozřejmě, co jsem si
Sorry.
hodně.
Dobře, že jo, zvlášť teda jako, když se takhle ptáš po 3 letech, tak jako,
Jak se to stalo?
ten studí,
Já jsem na něm vždycky šel kolem, tak se na něm
se není
Rád bych vám napsal, bych vám, že vám nebál všechno, jako na jestli budu uvidím.
Proč víš tam koukat na mladí?
Taky má se
Vrší,
What's the protocol? Is it's
jo,
kind of long.
máme Krištofa, Jakina. Ahoj. No, někdy až pojedeš na vlaky, tak co zpátky. Tohle to teda jako slyším poměrně často, odkazky sám, odkazky diákovi a licenci, který jako, to je chodí tam na procházky, jdou na chvíľkách, tak tam taky, jo. A takhle ale vlastně hrozně snadný takže jsou, se nezamyká.
Já jsem
Jo. To je známka to je známka dobrého charakteru, ale stavíš, tak ti rádi vidíme. Ale velkou pravděpodobností, jo, že Bá je doma s Krištofem, nebo jsem já doma s Krištofem, a když není doma s Krištofem, tak je to proto, že prostě 15 let nežná. Je takový tracker. Asi jsou všichni stejný, že Věnová měla Krištofa syna narozený. Ten byl taky takovej. Jako jedna z mála pet, která se to občas bere na nejde. To je evidentně si začala časem líbit a přemýšlet o věcech. Jo? A teď si teda jako zvládnu mluvit maslo. Protože někteří to jako berou, takže je tam jako trade, jako se dítě lítá nebo mluví, když to jenom jako lítá a jak mají, že jo, jak mají děti tady vidět, co ví. Pořád něco chce. Je to hezké jméno. A potom taky jako Jo.
Jako docela jiný.
Krištofové dobře sní a dobře zní. Co by ne? Jo, některý si jo, on prostě je to, jo, jako stává taková ta situace, jako zavoláš a všichni a nebo nikdo. Jo,
Okay, hi guys. The speaker is ready, so please.
Sorry, go for it.
Okay, thank you everyone for coming. So before we start today, I would like to say that thing which I did not have time to say last time. We changed the booking system for the rooms which we have here. So we have here the Kokomo room, like this room, and then one floor higher, there is a smaller meeting room at those places. We call it Ambai. Ambai is a PNG word for sister, and it's in Kuman language. And I just like that. So it's totally random name of the space which you can book. And then we put to the system also the booking for the dormitories, which we have at the same floor. So at each of the doors, you have the QR code. So random students, anyone can just scan it with the phone and book your room for whenever you need. And the PIs of the laboratory have the access to more admin rights in the system. If you don't have it, please let me know. Then we have some changes in the personalities in the department, because Hanka Buteril, who was managing the travels for everyone, she is leaving from the position, and she actually quit the work already 6 days ago. And the job is now being transferred to Jarmila over there. So you will find Jarmila at the second floor. And so far, Hanka is helping her to transfer all the knowledge and everything. And in a month, it will be fully up to Jarmila to organize all your travel forms. And do we have some new people here today? We have here Piotr. We didn't see Piotr for many, many years. So who, if you don't know, Piotr Siffer, who is employed here, but we rarely see him. And someone needs to be introduced? No one. Okay. So thank you very much. And so now the floor will be given to Pavel Duda, who didn't come from far. He came from the faculty. So you may know him, and he is also supervising some of the students who are associated to our department. And he will be talking about the evolution of marriages. So Pavel, thank you.
Thanks, Katka. Good afternoon. Hi, thanks for having me. Today, I am going to talk about social institutions, particularly marriage practices as ecological adaptations, and also more generally about how researchers who study evolution of human behavior approach culture, and how cultural anthropology needs to be more like evolutionary biology in order to become a real historical science, which is always strived to be. So the subtitle is here like a disclaimer. I'm going to talk about phylogenetic comparative methods, this apparently, applied to human cross-cultural variation. So humans are fascinating animals. During the past 100,000 years or so, anatomically modern humans have expanded out of Africa to virtually every corner of the earth, diversifying in the process and adapting to a range of different environments, thanks largely to their enormous capacity for culture. And this is the center narrative of science that is called human behavior ecology. Human behavior ecologists, they study human behavior using a tool set of behavior ecology, right? Behavior ecologists measure human behaviors across environments and their effects on fitness, or some proxies thereof. So they are these field-oriented Darwinian anthropologists who travel to various cultures and study how they are adapted to these different environments. In doing so, they do something that is called phenotypic gambit. They remain largely agnostic as to what processes have generated these behavior, what is the history of these behavior, that they largely assume that behaviors evolved for fitness maximizing purposes. But they are being constantly reminded by so-called evolutionary psychologists, which are more experimentally oriented, that we cannot assume that humans are well adapted to current environments, that when we search for human adaptations, behavior adaptations, we are really interested in universal adaptations on the level of psychology and cognition. Anyway, the past environment, evolutionary psychologists operates with this term called environment of evolutionary adaptedness, the EEA, which is really a vague term. Like in theory, it's this n-dimensional hyperspace defined by past selective pressures. In practice, you can imagine like East African savannas during the Pleistocene as our ancestor environment that formed our behavior the most. But it's really problematic. The concept is generally true, but vague. I think best it works as a consciousness raising device. But when we are interested, but evolutionary psychologists cannot say anything specific about that past environment. And we are not really interested in temperature, precipitation, vegetation cover. What we are interested in is the past social environment. And we don't know anything about it. Then the narrative about us not being adapted to the current environment is problematic because evolutionary human behavior ecologists have proven time and time again that we are really good fitness maximizers, that we are really well attuned to these different environments. But at the same time, behavior ecology uses problematic for proxies for fitness. Behavior ecologists, they do not count babies. They measure physical attractiveness and number of sexual partners and such things, which have at the best some relationship to fitness, but it's not fitness. And they, with regards to the past, they use referential modeling. They use present-day hunter-gatherers as proxies for our ancestors, which is also problematic. To sum it up, evolutionary psychology is not interested in diversity of behavior, and behavior ecology is not interested in the historical processes that generate behavior. Now, there is a third branch of evolutionary human sciences that is very much interested in behavioral diversity and processes that generate it, and that is cultural transmission or cultural evolution. It is a science that has many names, like gene-culture coevolution and dual inheritance theory, and you may have heard about memetics and memes. It's a really messy. And another problem is that cultural evolution is actually a part of human behavior ecology. But behavior ecology don't think about it that way. They don't think they study culture when they study human behavior. Like evolutionary human scientists sometimes have this tendency to view culture as something that makes us less adapted, something that is cultural change is contrary to adaptation, and that is an old F-psych narrative about how we can be well adapted, well attuned to our environment, but we really are not. We are these Neanderthals in tuxedo and hunter-gatherers driving in the fast lane and so on. But really, there is no conflict. Cultural evolution is part of behavior ecology because we adapt through culture to different environments, and our environments are actually cultural. They are culturally constructed, and culture is any behavior that is socially transmitted, and almost all behaviors are. So when you think about it, these three approaches just ask different parts of the same question: why humans behave the way they do. This scheme is like Tim Berken's 4 Whys that you all know and love. And whereas evolutionary psychology is interested in underlying mechanisms of behavior, behavior ecologists are interested in the end result, the fitness value attached to behaviors. And of course, like cultural variance, this applies to culture as well. Cultural variance have fitness values attached to it. And cultural evolution is interested in the processes, in historical processes, ontogeny and phylogeny of behaviors. How did these traits evolve? Why they evolved? What was the ancestral context? And so on. So this includes studying cultural macroevolution, but there are methodological issues. Behavior ecologists cannot experiment on humans as much as they might like. So they rely a lot on cross-cultural comparisons, just like behavior ecologists rely on cross-species comparisons. But then there is this problem that human societies are not independent units of analysis because of common ancestry. And this is an old problem in evolutionary anthropology, like from the very beginnings of anthropology, like 1870s, anthropologists have realized, or it was Francis Galton, this famous or infamous cousin of Charles Darwin, who realized that we cannot make inferences about evolution of human social institutions unless we account for shared ancestry. And so this became to be known in anthropology as Galton's problem. Galton's problem is not a problem that Mr. Galton had. Galton's problem is a problem that Mr. Galton said other anthropologists that they have. And they realize it very well. And they have approached it using a really weird method. They tried during like the mid-20th century to mitigate it using samples of so-called independent societies. Only limited samples of human cultures that are that are not directly related, but it is nonsensical. It's like as if mammaliologists made a deal 60 years ago that in order to mitigate phylogenetic autocorrelation, they will study only 200 selected species of mammals. It's maybe a good comparison because there are approximately the same number of mammal species as there are human ethnolinguistic groups. So ethnographers focused on these independent societies. They create something that is called standard cross-cultural sample and focused on it. And over time, they gathered over 2,000 cultural behavior traits for these 200 societies, but still, this approach is extremely problematic. It was devised long before phylogenetic comparative methods, long before Joel Felsenstein, long before even like independent contrast. So this was the best they could do, but the phylogenetic autocorrelation remains. In fact, what you end up doing when you do this is that you won't get rid of the Galton's problem, and you will limit your ability to detect convergent evolution, so evidence for adaptation. Your inability to deal with this without phylogenies. But deriving phylogeny of human societies is difficult. It's an interspecies phylogeny. The data are kind of scattered. You don't know what markers to use. We circumvented this problem by using everything there was. We put together all genetic and linguistic phylogenies based on different types of genetic and genomic data and lexical and structural data, and combine them using a method that is called a supertree. To make it simple, supertree is essentially a consensus tree where source trees have partially overlapping set of taxa. So we derived this tree of trees for about 2,000 human societies, about one-third or one-fourth of all ethno-linguistic groups. And it is like a nice methodological exercise. You are able to detect topological conflicts and see what causes them. But the main motivation is to derive this sample of societies, then the phylogeny of societies that you can then use as phylogenetic control to study evolution of culture. So we focused first on these 186 societies in the standard cross-cultural sample, and then we could start studying human culture, social institution. And first, we focused on marriage because it's the basic social institutions from which everything is derived. It's a foundation for other social institutions and cultural norms and practices. So we decided to test all theories that explain prevalence of polygyny, essentially cross-culturally. Humans are, again, fascinating because they display wide variety of marriage patterns or of social mating systems, from monogamy to polyandry to polygyny. So there is a polygyny here represented by Ghana, and polyandry represented by Tibet. This is a fraternal polyandry, but it's not always fraternal elsewhere in the world. And then there is monogamy, represented by the British royal family, which shows that it can get a bit messy sometimes. And then there is this ideal monogamous nuclear family that you may know from like mortgage commercials and stuff. And for some reason, people think this is the norm. Cross-culturally, polygyny prevails. Most societies, like 4/5 of societies, allow polygyny, and there is great variance in polygynous marriage, how it's organized, what it entails, how much polygyny there is, whether it's harem-like or mild. Then polyandry is rare, although not as rare as we maybe used to think. And monogamy is the norm in approximately 17% of human societies. At the same time, monogamy is common even in societies that allow polygyny. The traditional explanation for polygyny is the polygyny threshold model. It's derived from behavior ecology, from zoology, originally birds, I would say, or I think, and it says that females should marry polygynously, or should mate polygynously when the variance in male qualities that are relevant to female fitness is high. Originally, this was a quality of territory, but it can be wealth, health, status, and so on. If the variance reaches certain threshold, called the polygyny threshold, becoming a second wife of an already married man offers greater expected fitness benefits than becoming a first wife of an unmarried man. But the things are considerably more complicated than that. There are many theories, and polygyny can be like the prevalence of polygyny can increase when there is a high variance in good genes or proxies thereof. good physical health and so on, physical attractiveness, I don't know. Then polygyny threshold can be based on wealth and status, and this would be equal to what ecologists call resource defense polygyny. Or it can be a result of intense physical competition among males, so male coercion. This doesn't mean that males will coerce females into mating polygynously, rather that high violence rates within society can put premium on male protection. So females can seek males that are especially capable. Then sex ratio certainly plays a role, and paternal investment is thought to play a role. Essentially, there is an expected trade-off between mating effort and parenting effort, and when males care of children instead of pursuing other women, then it favors monogamy. And then there are other theories which I will get to later. Anyway, we put all this together and characterize these theories using, first of all, we characterize marriage, polygyny, as first of actual behavior, percent of married men that are polygynous, and also as a cultural norm, so whether polygyny is permitted or limited or forbidden, and to what degree. And we characterize the theories that I just talked about using 11 social ecological predictors that are proxies for these aforementioned theories, and use the phylogeny that we have, essentially a subset of this super tree of 2000 societies, as phylogenetic control. When you optimize the mating behavior on this global phylogeny of the standard of ethnographic standard cross-cultural sample, you can immediately see two things. These societies are not at all independent, in a sense that they are equally related or unrelated to each other, not at all. And that marriage patterns show this very strong phylogenetic clustering, the strong phylogenetic signal. So regions or clades that are polygynous and have been polygynous, like ancestrally, the ancestral state is mild polygyny, but highly polygynous group includes sub-Saharan Africans, parts of North Africa and the Middle East, then Papua New Guinea and Australia, and then sections, parts of the New World population, North and especially South Americans, but again, strong phylogenetic clustering. So when we look at ecological predictors of polygyny, first of all, we showed that phylogeny actually explains twice as much variance in marriage patterns as all the 11 predictors combined. It has a very strong influence, and not including phylogeny, you get false positives and false negatives. This really changes the support for various theories. For example, support for direct parental investment, paternal investment drops dramatically if you include phylogeny. After this correction, the two strongest predictors of polygyny are pathogene stress and assault frequency, the frequency of intergroup violence. And the thing is that the maximum levels of pathogene stress increase levels of polygyny approximately 6-fold. Maximum levels of within-group violence increases polygyny approximately 2-fold. It makes a good sense because pathogens and violence exacerbates the variance in female fitness relevant traits. Polygyny prevails in environments where it's difficult for men to develop and retain healthy phenotypes, right? And that by the way, shows that polygyny really isn't harmful cultural practice, as it is sometimes called, but it rather is an adaptation to harsh environment that is quite consistent with female mate choice. However, this leads us to the evolutionary mystery because, as I said, approximately 17% of societies cross-culturally impose normative monogamy. Almost 1/5 of societies is monogamous, strictly monogamous. And the question is why? Time and time again, you can see some article in tabloid newspapers that monogamy, we were not meant to be monogamous, monogamy is not natural to us, and so on. When you want to read something more serious, when you look into like actual peer-reviewed literature, you see that the titles are pretty much the same. Yeah, monogamy has been called mysterious and puzzling and paradoxical. And this is not because monogamy is hard to maintain, because like it is. Those freshly divorced Hollywood celebrities are absolutely right. But the real reason it is mysterious is because it goes directly against the predictions of behavior ecology. The increased variance in male qualities should lead to polygyny. The thing is that societies with greatest wealth and status inequalities, those that have high social complexity, high stratification, these are societies that have intensive agriculture, impose social monogamy. This is the relationship between subsistence patterns and marriage patterns. So hunter-gatherers are typically monogamous, and this is viewed as ecologically imposed monogamy, right? There is very little variance in wealth status, etc. between males. Most males cannot have more wives or more than one wife for long term, so this is Gini coefficient of wealth. This describes the wealth inequalities within these societies. Wealth inequalities increase with social complexity, but the marriage patterns, this happens. There is very little polygyny. There is little polygyny in hunter-gatherers. Then in horticulturalists and pastoralists, there is more polygyny, and then with intensive agriculture, polygyny drops dramatically because many of these societies impose social monogamy, and monogamy is imposed from the top. It's the law. Law is made by the elites, so political and religious leaders, and these are the men who would most likely benefit from polygyny. The question is, why do these wealthy, high-ranking males devise and impose a social system that removes their prerogative to even a single co-wife or mistress? There are several theories, again, multiple theories. People have been really interested in this. The one that is perhaps the most famous shows that the consequence of polygyny and also the cause of polygyny, as you saw, are elevated crime and violence rates. Essentially, polygyny creates a surplus, a large pool of young, unmarried men that cause problems. And complex and stratified societies that want to remain complex and stratified needs to minimize this sort of conflict because they rely on like large number of males for trade and commerce, for specialization essentially, and also they need a large amount of males to recruit to armies, to wage wars, and so on. So they need to reduce this intra-societal friction. And outlawing polygyny does exactly that. It gives all men equal reproductive opportunities, it decreases male competition, and promotes intra-group cooperation. So in effect, monogamous societies defeat, assimilate, or outlive polygynous societies. They do so either by military conquest or just acculturation, and you can see that this is essentially a group selection mechanism. The author of this theory is Joseph Henrich, and Joseph Henrich is this cool, hot professor from Harvard who has considerable media presence, who writes books, and it's like, you know, the saying from Game of Thrones that the one with the best story will become king. This is the best story. This is the most intriguing one, but there are other hypotheses that has to do with not just wealth inequality, but the type of wealth, which is important. There are two types of wealth, evolutionarily speaking, rival and non-rival wealth. And non-rival wealth is something that you can pass to your offspring without diminishment in value. Think good genes or status, good name, and so on. You can give it away and you still have plenty of it. It's not the same thing with, for example, direct paternal investment. When you spend time with one offspring, you have less time for like other ventures. Also, this applies to immovable property and land specifically. And one of the influential theories talks specifically about intensive agriculture, essentially mid-Holocene agricultural transition, because when agriculture intensified, it led to population expansion and saturation of the environment, and depletion of arable land. So there was no more possibility to expand to new land. So what happened was that the land was privatized and family size decreased in order to like consolidate wealth over generations. Also, the theory says that transition to monogamous inheritance should be accompanied by some cultural norms that promote paternity certainty. So putting emphasis on like chastity, purity, virginity, no sex before marriage, and so on. The behavior economist view says that monogamy is like an exchange of exclusive paternity for exclusive paternal investment, and it's really a bit simplistic. Anyway, these theories that I described are definitely not mutually exclusive. They are like Venn diagrams. There is aspect of one in each other, and what really differs is what is the cause, what is the consequence. So we try to kind of tease this apart and confront these theories on the same playground, which no one before really did. But yeah, so we had again had the marriage as a response variables, and then we have our social, cultural, and environmental predictors that capture these theories about origins of monogamy. But we had to really formalize these theories using structural causal models, because they are complicated, and we tried really hard to like not to mischaracterize what each author of each theory thought. We accounted for common descent, for phylogeny, but there was also an element of ethnographic present when the societies in our sample were sampled, because monogamy spread over the past 200 years. Monogamy spread horizontally very fast, like Coca-Cola. So we need to control for when these societies were sampled and what was the so temporal distance matrix was included in the analysis as well. And the results are complex. We essentially simulated the posterior distribution of marriage patterns under low and high levels of each social, ecological, environmental predictors, characterizing these theories that have to do with intergroup competition and basically inheritance of status, wealth, and the kind of wealth, then the proxies for land shortage and inheritance, and let's say norms of premarital behavior and female behavior. And I won't go too much into it because still it's too small. But what is important is this. high wealth inequality will always have the distribution of marriage pattern for low and high levels of each predictors. High wealth inequality produces both a lot of polygyny and a lot of monogamy. And only rival wealth, especially specifically arable land that is privatized, creates a lot of monogamy by also decreasing polygyny substantially. And what also explains distribution of monogamy well are these environmental predictors that captures the shortage of arable land, so distance to coast, elevational gradients, incline, and so on. Also population density. But these social political predictors have very little effect. In conclusion, the evidence, because of this, evidence for intergroup competition is mixed. The problem is that studies of monogamy have continuously focused on West Eurasia, Indo-European societies. So yes, we have explained monogamy cross-culturally by focusing on most monogamous people on Earth, and then we explain evolution of monogamy using peculiarities of these people, of Indo-Europeans. These hypotheses are really tailor-made to Indo-Europeans, but the observed effects decrease when we exclude Indo-European from our global sample. So there is quite understandable bias, and I think it's interesting. What really explains monogamy well, cross-culturally, are establishment of our land privatization and establishment of property rights, and the topographical traits like really ecology, basic environmental variables. And it means that the monogamy for all that is socially imposed is also ecologically imposed. It's the same phenomenon as with hunter-gatherers who can't afford multiple wives. So farmers have the very same issue because having larger families would lead to depletion of land over time. There would be you need to limit the number of children, you need to limit the number of heirs, at least you need to limit the number of legitimate heirs. It means that agriculture really is to blame for our basic sex life, although I would like to point out that these literature, popular literature or scientific literature, that takes this highly academic approach towards polyamory is wrong about claiming that what was before socially imposed monogamy, before intensive agriculture, was some social system that resembled bonobos or something like that. What was there before that was probably higher levels of polygyny and associated cultural norms. So, in conclusion, polygyny is not a harmful cultural practice. It's an adaptation to a harsh environment that exacerbates variance in male traits that females are interested in. That is to say, polygyny is also linked to some cultural practices that are also considered harmful and that has serious fitness consequences: paying bride price, child marriage, various sexual taboos, genital mutilation. But there is no time to discuss that here. Socially imposed monogamy is not really puzzling. It is an adaptation to resource constraints. It is a tool to consolidate wealth over generation and a tool to mitigate conflict between relatives within the family. And monogamy achieves that by making sure you have almost no relatives at all. Like in the mid-Holocene, this was the first step towards smaller nuclear families that we live in right now. So marriage is an adaptation, and it is also a historical artifact. Marriage practices have very high phylogenetic signal, definitely in comparison with other cultural traits that we studied. this has the important implication that Galton's problem really is a problem, but you cannot say how big a problem it is unless you have phylogeny. And only when you have a phylogeny, you can detect convergent adaptation. You can assess correctly how much adapting there actually was in the past and how long ago and so on. So you can't do these studies properly without phylogenies. And in conclusion, cultural evolution approaches and cultural phylogenetics can really complement and bridge the gap between human behavior, ecology, and cultural and evolutionary psychology by, for example, by talking about ancestor environment and ancestor social structure more specifically, and by putting prehistory back into anthropology, by reconstructing historical processes behind the present day patterns. But again, you are unable to do it without phylogenies and phylogenetic approach. So I'd like to thank my co-authors, mainly Rihanna Minocher, Gabor Shafa, and Adrian Yagi, and to you for your attention. Thanks.
Quick one about you made this phylogeny by putting together the linguistic and the genetic data. How much do they agree?
The thing about agreement between language phylogenies and genetic phylogenies is there is less conflict than you would expect, because they inform us about the different temporal levels of human population history. Language phylogenies have limited time depth of approximately 8,000 years or so, because language evolves fast. And genetic phylogenies typically get the relationship between larger regions right and between continents right, but they include considerably fewer ethnolinguistic groups. In language phylogenies, there are typically like hundreds of languages, for example, Indo-European, Austronesian, Bantu, and so on, whereas language phylogenies are considerably, genetic phylogenies are smaller, and so they act as a backbone tree. They are responsible for different parts of the topology of the tree. Other than that, regionally, the amount of conflict varies, and it's a really complicated topic, but overall, less conflict than you would expect.
Resolution.
Yeah.
Not conflict.
I mean, when we reconstructed the phylogeny, we identify these wildcard taxa, the jumping taxa that de-resolve the topology of the tree, and some of these conflicts are really conflicts like broad conflicts between language and genes. Malagasy people of Madagascar, genetically predominantly African, linguistically Austronesian, Malayo-Polynesians from Borneo. Yeah, so they can like dissolve the entire tree if you allow them to. But yeah, it's not as big of an issue as we worried.
You already probably considered this, but I would like to ask, you said one of the most confusing things about socially enforced monogamy is the fact that those at the top shouldn't really benefit from it. Because, you know, in polygynous societies, obviously those at the top benefit more because they have all the women. Has it been considered that social monogamy doesn't really apply to those at the top?
Absolutely. Yeah. When you look at the first monogamous societies, the ancient Babylon, Rome, ancient China, Aztec Empire, and so on, you see that those on the top have had more women, and the rules didn't apply to lower classes. So the very first record of socially imposing monogamy is Babylonia, Hammurabi's law, and Hammurabi himself. He had like 5 wives and maybe hundreds of concubines. So yes, there was definitely a double standard. But gradually, monogamy became a standard for ruling class, and they really abode by it. But they still had, they had one legitimate wife, legitimate heirs, and they had mistresses and backup heirs.
So as polygynous has advantages in terms of dividing the resources.
Yes, yes.
So would you say that maybe the polygyny versus monogamy is a bit equivalent to the R versus K strategy in other organisms?
Absolutely, and it is talked about it in this way, that it's that there is a trade-off between the quantity and quality of offspring, and the direct paternal care has a lot to do with it, but involved fatherhood is only possible in monogamy when you don't have that many children. At the same time, really, polygyny is not harmful, because the fitness consequences for children in highly monogamous societies or regions are typically positive. You just need to measure it right. But when you look at highly polygynous regions, which are typically regions with a lot of environmental and resource stress, typically in Africa, you see that households that are polygynous, in these households, children fare better in terms of health, nutritional status, access to education. That is not to say that there are different definitions of harmful, right? It can either be detrimental to individual well-being and health, and it can be detrimental to fitness. Yeah. So when you look at, for example, spousal violence, domestic violence, polygyny in some African region is harmful. You can demonstrate it, but in terms of fitness of men, women, and children, not so much.
So you mentioned that some of those explanations are basically based on, for polygyny, are based on the group selection or something towards that. So I wonder, in more details of those models, so are there some alternative explanations, let's say based on kin selection or inclusive fitness or game theory or something? Because from other social organisms, the group selection always turned out to be something very problematic, of course, much more accepted in the social sciences and so on. So I wonder whether it's just popular model, or there are equally or some better mathematical explanations for it.
As I said, the model based on group selection is popular, and I think it's largely thanks to charisma and media presence of Joe Henrich, and people who talk about it and think about it are not usually biologists, evolutionary biologists, but rather sociologists, psychologists. So they don't see group selection as this red flag. And cultural group selection is something that can definitely work, because when monogamy is imposed and polygyny is prohibited actively, it can work. And I think it was responsible for example, spread of monogamy during the 20th century, because monogamous societies are, in fact, more stable in many ways. But the other theories that I described are definitely based on inclusive fitness maximization, particularly those about impartible wealth and land shortage. Also, those that look at the trade-off between mating effort, parental effort, are also about inclusive fitness. They operate on the levels of individuals.
So the other question was do these studies adjust what Christianity did with all these things, how they are able to basically recover these ancient traits, right, from these things, or some other religions, right? How I wonder how much is easy to recover.
There is such an extensive literature on the topic about of Christianity and monogamy, and if I make the answer as straightforward as possible, it would appear that Christianity evolved rather in concert with increasingly monogamous marriage norms and rules than than vice versa. And some of these theories are really problematic because they, for example, really think that monogamy in Europe even is very young, either dating to like late times of late Roman Empire or medieval times. It definitely is not the case because Proto-Indo-Europeans were monogamous and combined monogamy with dowry, and yeah, so it's like all integrated social system or complex of social norms. But yeah, extensive literature on the topic. It's really complicated and it's beyond the scope of this like biological anthropology because it's a really historiography.
I have a question. You mentioned at the start polyandry, but like in the next analysis, it like somehow vanished in the and where is it on the phylogeny and where is it on the predictors? Does it fucked up every analysis?
Okay, that's a good question. So polyandry is very rare in the standard cross-cultural sample. There is one or two societies that are polyandrous, and when you measure it as a continuum, it doesn't tend to fuck up anything because I would say that monogamy is really an extreme case of polyandry is really an extreme case of monogamy. How polyandry works is not that like a group of female selects a group of husbands or marries a husband and then adds another and have multiple co-husbands. Polyandry, especially in Tibet, works like a group of men that are brothers marry a single female for exactly the reasons that I described are the causes of monogamy. The agriculture is like low production, the fields are small, there is no place to expand. The family size need to be limited extremely. So typical pattern is that the oldest brother marries a woman, the second one goes to the monastery, becomes a monk and lives in lifelong celibacy. The third son is very young at the time when the oldest one marries, and he has this status. He has the status of husband formally, but he acts as like rather as a son to the wife. So it's brothers marry a single woman together. Yeah, and then there are different types of polyandry. In lowland South America, there is a belief about partible paternity, so men share paternity, and it has, like, again, interesting fitness consequences. Sometimes then there are records of polyandry in Inuits, in Sri Lanka, in remote in the Pacific, in some Pacific islands. And the case there was that a wealthy man was able to marry a woman who was already married to another man, so he essentially takes the couple under his roof. So again, a really weird marriage pattern. So I see polyandry. Polyandry is first very rare, and it's this part of the continuum. It's extreme form of monogamy. Yeah, not one male can afford only a single woman, but group of men can afford a single woman together. Yeah, so it's there, but the effect is negligible.
Yeah, thanks for the really nice talk. So you have shown this tree graph of the societies, of the relatedness of the societies. Is in your field any tendency to move from these strictly bifurcating trees to something which would have actual reticulation? Because I guess particularly in a structure which is showing, trying to capture the relatedness of societies, the transfer, either genetic or cultural, between the clades is probably like very important. So I'm wondering if, and then the second question would be how actually this more complicated, non-strictly bifurcating tree, but reticulated tree, how this would be implemented into some phylogenetic comparative methods.
Yes. population geneticists and historical linguists who work with phylogenetic methods use these graphs, like split decomposition and neighbornet graphs, a lot to depict instances of horizontal transmission, interbreeding, and so on. And this is a nice way to visualize conflict in the data, and there's a lot of it. What these phylogenetic comparative methods usually do is that they don't use a single tree, but they use some posterior distribution of tree from Bayesian analysis, so you can account for the underlying uncertainty of tree topology and chronology this way, and you can visualize it like cladogram, for example. But to the second question, the implementation in phylogenetic comparative context would be extremely difficult, and I don't know that any form of phylogenetic regression can work with these reticulated graphs. I don't think it can, but I think that working with sample of 1,000 or 10,000 trees is a good supplement for that. It's a good alternative.
How spatially congruent is the phylogeny? The phylogenetic clustering on your phylogeny, does it also mean spatial clustering so that certain regions, because that could be sort of replacement explanation to phylogenetical signal?
There is a great deal of spatial clustering because isolation by distance is an important process that generates relatedness between human populations, both on both genetic differences and linguistic differences, although I don't think anyone has ever studied it rigorously. They talk about it when discussing genetic phylogeny, but haven't measured if it's the same or less a problem in linguistic, when you look at linguistic phylogeny. So there is a lot of it that say in some analysis, in some papers that we do, we used a geographic distance matrix as an alternative to phylogenetic distance matrix based on the supertree. Also, and we use even other measures like a linguistic phylogeny derived from another data set, and the supertree is best. It probably captures the most variance in the variables that we work it, because it's kind of it seems to be a sweet spot between historical relationship and geographical proximity that captures the potential for horizontal transmission, for culture borrowing, I would say. So there is a lot of it, but the supertree works better as a control.
Okay, thank you very much. I think it's time to stop for now. The questions, if you want to continue here. Thanks very much. And so next week we will have no seminar because it's a spring holidays and I'm away and I don't want to organize it from distance. So, and in the 14 days we have a seminar. Yes, so we will meet here again. And thank you very much.